Stages of a fire. Stage 2, flashover, flaming. In the flashover stage, the mix of heat, oxygen, and fuel increases the odds of a fire growing and building. If not suppressed, the fire begins to spread beyond the initial ignition point to consume additional fuel sources. Flames are visible and gaining ground. It is during this stage when a deadly flashover can occur, potentially trapping, injuring, or killing anyone caught in the flames. Chapter 5. I lay awake in bed for hours that first night at Grandma B and Grandpa Howard's house, listening to a symphony of unfamiliar sounds. This far outside civilization, nighttime wasn't the same. Each noise was magnified, the sounds of darkness amplified by surrounding quiet. The ticking of the clock in the corner of the living room wasn't something I'd noticed in the daytime, but as soon as the rest of the house was put to bed, it ticked and talked away the seconds, reminding me with each shift of the hands that I couldn't fall asleep, wouldn't fall asleep, really wanted to sleep. The hum of the baseboard heater that ran along the bottom of the wall revved and groaned like a tiny motorboat crossing the carpeted den. Out in the kitchen, the ancient fridge clicked on and off, sounding far too much like the tap of tentative footsteps outside my makeshift bedroom. Trembling, I hugged Astrid the ostrich tight, hoping something familiar from home might bring back enough peaceful memories to protect me from this scary new place. But despite the fact that Grandma had washed and dried her, with a bonus dryer sheet thrown in for good measure, Astrid still smelled faintly of smoke, like a nightmare, which was not what she was supposed to smell like. She was supposed to offer the comfort I needed. I shoved my beloved ostrich away, scrambled out of the pull-out bed, and plugged in the nightlight Grandma had set out for me, just in case. As soon as I jammed it into the outlet, the world of my bedroom was bathed in an eerie blue light. For a moment the murky blue tricked me into thinking I was trapped underwater. My breath caught in my throat, choking me, until I remembered I could still breathe, that I was perfectly safe, and could take a deep breath whenever I needed it. There had been quite a few times this past week when I'd had trouble catching my breath and felt panic racing through my body as I fought for air. Both Amelia and I had sucked in a lot of smoke and fumes and other bad stuff during the fire, and even though I hadn't needed a breathing tube like my sister, Dad told me it would take time for my body and lungs to return to normal. I had a feeling that even if my lungs eventually did go back to normal, the rest of me never would. Not quite. I'd always been scared of all kinds of semi-normal things: tall buildings, slipping down the stairs, getting sucked underwater, and not being able to figure out which way was up. One day last summer, when a bunch of my friends took turns riding the zip line into the water at the outdoor pool near my house, I'd offered to take pictures so I didn't have to do it, because I knew I'd be too scared to jump into the pool when I reached the end of the ride, and then maybe the zip line wouldn't stop the way it was supposed to, and I'd smash right into the concrete on the other side of the pool. My friends all knew me well enough that they understood what I was doing, even without me saying anything out loud. I was pretty sure heights, falling, drowning, and ziplining were all valid fears. But now, I was suddenly afraid of absolutely everything, valid and not. During the past week, I'd noticed dozens of new fears wiggling into my brain: the shapeless dark, intruders, choking on my chewing gum, getting hit by a car, falling off my bike, and a whole collection of illnesses and conditions that I'd overheard people talking about after the fire, while I was resting at the hospital. Since arriving in Minnesota, I was now also terrified something awful would happen to Big Bear during the night. Each day the fears seemed to multiply. I thought of that night again and wondered for the millionth time this week, if I hadn't let my fear take over on the night of the accident, would my sister still be in the hospital? I had gone into the bathroom to puke, and then I'd stood in Amelia's doorway for I don't know how long, watching silently as my sister got consumed and swallowed up by the fire. I could have been so much more quicker if I hadn't been so scared. I would never forgive myself, but maybe I could try to be less scared from now on, so my fears could never cripple me like that again. As I lay there in the darkness, I promised myself that tomorrow would be a new day. I couldn't keep letting these irrational what-ifs take over. I was pretty sure that Mom and Dad had sent me away for the summer because dealing with me and my problems and everything I was afraid of was just too much, especially when they had something serious and real, like Amelia's injuries to cope with. They didn't need to say it for me to know. My sister had real problems. Mine were just in my head. But if I could prove to my parents that I was strong and capable and able to take care of myself, they might let me come home soon. They might let me try to help fix the things I'd broken. If I didn't need so much fixing myself, I wouldn't be in the way. With the darkness now pushed to the shadows, everything inside my little den looked like it was glowing. For the first time, I noticed there was a giant stuffed bumblebee hanging, like a hunter's stuffed prize, in the corner of the room. Its enormous checkerboard eyes stared at me, daring me to nod off so it could sink down and sting me to death. I stared back at it, reminding myself that it was harmless. A silly, stuffed, incredibly lifelike King Kong of a bee. Still, that bee glared at me in the midnight haze. I reached down and pulled the nightlight back out of the wall, deciding that the mystery of the dark unknown was better than being able to see everything there was to be afraid of. I pushed open the window over my bed, desperate for fresh air, then flopped back down in bed and begged my body to go to sleep. Something hooted in a tree outside, while another creature rustled and snuffed in the leaves below my window. Just an owl, I told myself. A squirrel or a big bear, I whispered aloud, over and over again. Way across the yard, I could hear the far-off crackle of Grandpa's campfire. While I was getting ready for bed, I'd learned that most nights Grandpa slept by himself, out in an old pull-behind camper he and Grandma kept parked in the yard behind the house. This habit seemed weird to me, but so did Grandpa. Maybe it was perfectly normal for someone like him to sleep in a camper alone in the yard. It made me sad to think of Grandma, crawling into her big bed by herself every night. But maybe she liked the peace and quiet. Maybe no one else was like Amelia and me, sisters who looked forward to our Saturday night sleepovers. Almost every weekend, my sister would drag her sleeping bag into my bedroom and camp out on the floor next to my bed. Eventually, she'd slither up into bed right beside me, and we'd tell each other stories until I could sense her voice getting husky and sleepy and could see her eyes drifting closed, even though she never wanted to be the first one to fall asleep. Outside, Grandpa Howard's fire clicked and popped, and I could imagine the embers glowing orange, tendrils of smoke curling up toward the sky. I suddenly felt like I was going to be sick, so I scrambled up to my knees and slid the window closed, focusing instead on the nervous tick of the clock. I missed my sister. I wondered what, if anything, she could hear from her hospital bed. Would Mom be sitting beside her wrapped body, watching cooking shows on the tiny TV perched on the little shelf above Amelia's feet? Were there still machines that beeped and ticked behind her all night like Grandma's clock? Could she hear the chatter at the nurse's station? And was she making mental notes of the funny conversations she overheard so she could tell me all of them when she came home? Could you hear things when you were that out of it? She was still so drugged up, it was almost like she was in a medically induced coma, Mom told me. So she probably wasn't aware of much going on. If I were there and could read to her, would she be able to follow along in the story? Had she noticed that I wasn't coming by anymore? Was she scared of what was happening? Did it hurt? Would she come home? And would there ever be a home for us again? The questions in the darkness pressed down, choking me, daring me to breathe. If my sister were there, the strange sounds of this unfamiliar place would be muffled by her tiny, breathy snores. Her little arm would flop over me, hugging me in the dark. I had always hated the way she loved to sleep uncomfortably close. But right now, I'd give anything to have her soft, skinny arm trapping me under Grandma's scratchy blankets, to hear the rhythm of her snores, to feel her furnace of a body curled against me, and her hot nighttime breath on my neck. But Amelia was miles away. No one could touch her, and the secret keeping me from falling asleep was, It was all my fault. All my fault. All my fault. I had never felt so helpless or alone.